As promised this morning, we're going to do a little bit of exercises around Humoresque from Book 3 of Suzuki, and really, more namely, in some of the tougher slurs there that you have at the bottom of the first page and the beginning of the second page. Really what I think of as the most difficult section of this piece for the student, in these two lines where the melody goes up the octave. And it starts here in third position. I'll play these two lines first, and then I'm going to break down some of the exercises that I think are a good idea to do as part of practice for this. Okay, so this is how the section goes. My shift's not perfect this morning, right? I have not practiced this at all yet, so we're going to hopefully see that after I do about 10 of these exercises each in a couple of different ways like I'm about to show you, that I'm going to warm up and be able to hit these shifts, okay? So, look, even teachers aren't perfect. So, let's talk a little bit more about this. So really, the hard part about the end, about each one of these lines is the big shift up the fingerboard that you have to close each line. So in the first line, it's as the last little bit that's difficult. And in the second line, you have. So how do you get to those shifts? How do you know where you're going? How do you practice the shift itself? How do you practice the spacing? That's all things we're going to talk about for a few minutes this morning. So the first one, I like to break these shifts down into just the shift itself and kind of do a landing point shift back and forth as the first thing I do in this exercise. So I'm thinking about the context of the line itself, and I know that I have to move from a C natural on an extended first finger in second position to a G where my fourth finger in fourth position usually sits. Now I'm going to have a 2. Okay, so I get that same pitch. Should be a ringing tone on my instrument, and it should also therefore match my open G string. Okay, so really, without landing properly on this 2 in what is fifth position here, you're not going to be able to execute the rest of the figure, which is playing an A, a G, and an F in whole steps. So I like to practice the shift first. Let me show you. And I like to do this anywhere from 3 to as many as 10 times. I think for a young student, doing that 10 times could be a really good start. And if you notice, I'm doing kind of like this tabletop approach. So quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, which allows me to get the shift, listen to the note and hear it, and then give myself a little bit of time before I'm shifting back down to the C natural. Okay? So I'm going to give you a moment, or go ahead and pause the video here and do 10 times of that exercise on your own. Okay, so hopefully you did that 10 times. Also very important while you're doing that to think a little bit about the success you're having. Is it going well? Is it going less well? Are you missing sharp? Are you missing flat? That sort of self-assessment is an important piece of the puzzle here. So now that I feel pretty good about the shift itself, now I want to practice playing the shift, or executing the shift, and then getting my whole step spacing between 1, 2, and 3. This is another pretty tough part about this that I hear, playing less than perfectly in tuned notes, especially on this F natural, because it's a big spacing here between 2 and 1. So, here we go. I can take a little time in between this one. Think about how I felt about the spacing. there's two things to self-assess here in this one. Not only the shift up to the second finger G, but then how did I do with my spacing whole steps from A to G to F natural here? I thought that first one was pretty good. I'm warming up finally, right? Okay. And again, I think that you can do this as many as 10 times while self-assessing each time. Was the shift good? Was the spacing good? Which could use improvement? And then taking just a couple seconds in between each to have that sort of thought happening. So I'm going to give you a moment here. Go ahead and pause the video and now do 10 times through that section. Great. So one more exercise that you can do to break this line down just a little bit is by starting in the second half of the line and putting it all together, really to focus on the third and fourth measure of that line. So that section is when it starts, the third measure is really, so you have and I think you can kind of isolate that and then start here on the 2 in second position. So the section you'd be playing, or the bracket as some of my students know I like to call it, would be again on that third measure downbeat. And I think that that gives you a nice chunk of music to play that's really helping put it back in context and really practice it at that, what I call with my students sometimes, more of the macro level. Like instead of practicing just the shift, now I've put it back into the piece. And then of course, you can start at the beginning of the line. And hopefully that will help you. Any of those you can do 5 times, you can do 8 times, you can do 10 times, but those are the 3 or 4 sets of exercises I think are important to study. Now let's move to the second line. So good news is there's a lot in that is similar between these two lines, right? So you start out the same way. Really there for my students, I just really go over and over and over again talking about working on holding this first finger extension. If you can do that throughout that second measure, then you are in great shape. And then likewise, this second half of the line starts out feeling very similar too. Here we have a change. 2 to 2 shift there. So I'm in third position. So in this one, that little shift exercise that I would talk about would be a 1-to-1 shift from D natural up to A natural, which is where your harmonic normally sits. This is a perfect fifth, and I think it's a lot easier for the student to hear than the minor 7th that is the C natural that you ultimately get up to. Let me show you what I mean. So the actual music is, but given that I think that's hard to hear, I focus on where my first finger should land, and then I get this. Right? So hear that big ringing tone? So that's something that's going to really help me know whether or not I'm coming back to the right pitch. And again, it's that perfect fifth, something I can really get with my ear so that when I'm self-assessing, I know whether I'm hitting it or not. Okay? And if you want to try to take your finger off and get that harmonic as your check, remember harmonic is when you're just tapping the string and playing instead of putting it all the way down. Well, that's going to be another way that you can check in with that. So, pause the video now and go ahead and give me 10 times through that shift. Again, that same tabletop approach. D, A, D. Okay, welcome back. So now that we've practiced the shift itself, right? Now what we're going to do is we're going to insert that spacing up there, which in this case with the C natural is whole half, right? So there's a whole step between C natural and B flat, and then there's a half step between B flat and A. Okay? So when we do that together, it becomes this. Okay? And likewise, I think you can do this a bunch of times. Notice my thumb is coming up. Okay? And then just like I described with the other exercise, you can also then back up to the beginning of the third measure of that line and then back up to the beginning of the first measure of that line so that you can kind of put it more in context. Hope this video helped with giving you some of the pointers on the shift exercises that I believe really help you in Humoresque.